So the breeding soundness exam. We typically will see a breeding soundness exam will be done on a virgin bull to make sure that he is able to produce sperm and also evaluate the anatomy of that bull. So when you go buy a bull from a particular breeder, make sure he's got a breeding soundness exam, recent breeding soundness exam. So you'll typically see an exam done when you first purchase a bull. Now, just because he's fertile the first year doesn't mean he's fertile the second, third, and fourth, and fifth year. Bulls do go bad. Oftentimes we think about bulls when they start reaching that 6 to 8 years of age, the likelihood of them going bad or becoming infertile increases with each year of age that they have. And so as we've got a 3 and 4 year old bull, they're less likely to have any infertility problems. As we get to the 6th and 7th and 8th and 9 and 10, 11, 12, we increase the risk that those bulls may become infertile during that breeding season. So with that, we recommend that you should get a breeding soundness exam done on your bulls before you turn out each year, or at least once a year if you have a year-round breeding season. It's extremely important. When you think about the cost, it's minor compared to what it could cost you in a loss of a calf crop there. So the veterinarian ought to evaluate those bulls before they're turned out for the very first time, as well as each year after that. This includes, again, the scrotal circumference, a measurement of at least 30 centimeters in a 1-year-old, and a minimum of 33 centimeters in a 2-year-old bull. We talked about physical exam of the reproductive tract, the external, the testicles, as well as the sheath. But then the veterinarian will go in and palpate those accessory glands to make sure there's no problems and infections or enlargements there. Then they will go in and evaluate. They will take a collection of semen in either manual stimulation by palpating that bull, or by an electrode ejaculator, to where they will stimulate that bull to provide an ejaculate of semen. During that process of stimulation, it's also important for that veterinarian to extend the penis of that bull to make sure that he can extend it in preparation for mating a cow. And then he also gives an opportunity to evaluate the penis to make sure that there's not any warts or tears or cuts or abrasions or any problems going on with that would cause some problems with breeding cows upon turnout there. He will collect a sample of semen, he or she will, and immediately take that semen sample to the microscope. And the first thing they'll do is look for motility to make sure that there is movement of those sperm. If there's no motility, essentially the evaluation process is done and the bull is determined infertile. If we've got motility and adequate motility, then we move on to the next phase, is morphology. And morphology is looking at, to count the number of live sperm cells, but also to look at the number of defects that are happening. And if the number of dead cells and defects exceeds what is acceptable, then that bull at that time will be determined to be infertile as well, and recommended that we cull that bull. And so those are the two things that are extremely important. A lot of times our veterinarians will only look at motility, but it's extremely important that they also take a little extra time to go in and look at morphology, because you can have sperm cells that are moving around, but they may have a crooked tail or defect in their head, and they may not be able to make it all the way to the actual egg and actually able to fertilize that egg. So, and we've seen some challenges in herds where motility was the only thing that was being looked at. Then we went in, we couldn't figure out the problem, and we finally figured out is morphology was not being done on those bulls. We went in and looked at those bulls for motility and morphology. The bulls that passed motility, a good percentage of the bulls that were being turned out in that particular herd did not have adequate morphology levels. And so there was lots of defects, lots of problems with those sperms there. So here's your criteria for the actual breeding soundness exam on the sperm. They've got to be 70% normal sperm. So when they conduct the morphology, so you can only have the maximum of 30% defects in the sperm cells, and then 30% motile sperm in that as well. And so here's, you could see, looking at these slides, and we're evaluating morphology. And a good sample here, we've got the sperm cells. There's no defects on the heads of those sperms. Most of them have normal tails. There's one of those sperms that looks like it maybe has a broke tail there. But you could see a really good sample. It would certainly pass a breeding soundness exam. Here's another sample, and as you can see, there is some debris in there, but if you look at the sperm cells, there's a lot of crooked tails, bent tails, abnormal heads in those sperm cells. And this particular sample failed miserably, because if you look at the sperms, there's only just a few that are actual normal sperm cells there. Again, this is not to say that that bull wouldn't be able to fertilize a cow, but again, that's a high risk that you could have some open cows there, that maybe that bull just didn't settle enough cows. Here's a sample that's really a poor sample, and it's hard to find an actual normal sperm cell in that sample. Lots of defects, broken tails, heads, etc. are all some challenges there. This bull is an example of a bull that settled only 20% of the cows he was exposed to. He passed the motility portion of the exam, but failed morphology miserably. And as you can see, we've got really, in this particular portion of the slide, there's not any normal cells there. We've got some abnormal heads, we've got some broken tails, we've got some issues with that tail there in the middle. So again, it wasn't a complete bust, but he only settled 20% of the cows that he was breeding. And that is an economic disaster there. So just a prime example. Motility, this bull passed. Morphology, he didn't. Subsequently, we only had a 20% calf crop. So again, taking that extra step and getting your veterinarian to perform the morphology is extremely important.